Hello, everybody. I want to thank WET again for pulling this together. And thank you all of our panelists. That first panel was very informative. My name is Matt Heim. I'm the Executive Director of the Lower Shore Land Trust. I'm really pleased to be joining you this evening. Joining me on stage, we have Judith Stribling, who's joining us with Friends of the Nanticoke River. Judith is a professor emeritus at Salisbury University in biology, and she is, as I said, representing the Friends of the Nanticoke River this evening. Next to her, we have Mr. Charles Wright. His family owns the Cornerstone Farms and Wright's Market in Mardella. He's here with the Wicomico County Farm Bureau. We'll be sharing some of the agricultural perspective on what we're dealing with DAF and the processing there. Seated next to Charles, we have Lynette Kinney. She's with the Neighborhood Action Group. She's also a local here on the Delmarva Peninsula. Her and her husband, David, own the hardware store in Mardella, which is an institution. If you haven't visited it, you definitely should. She worked recently around an issue with DAF storage in the neighborhood of Hebron. And worked to address some of the issues there that eventually led to a spill. And so she'll be here to talk about some of the community impacts that come with handling some of these products. To her right, we have Miss Monica Brooks, who is with the NAACP. She's the president of the NAACP here in Wicomico County and has also been involved with issues surrounding agriculture in our local community. And finally, last but not least, to the end is Miss Holly Porter, who's here with the Delmarva Chicken Association. And then to my left, the lovely Miss Lisa Wool with the Nanticoke Watershed Alliance, who will be co-moderating with me, and I will turn it over to Lisa to get us started.
So I'm Lisa with the Nanticoke Watershed Alliance. We're an education and outreach as well as on-the-ground projects to preserve the Nanticoke River. We're science-based, so we really try to support things like this that WET and other groups have put on, where everyone comes together and shares their point of view to come up with great solutions. And so as I was driving here tonight, I was thinking about how the people in this region have really done such a tremendous job at preserving the lands and the waterways and the way of life. You really see that here more than a lot of areas. And so I think we're coming to a point where as populations have grown, farming has new demands on them. And so we're at a point where we need to come up with that new balance and where that new balance is. So I think nights like this are really important as the world's becoming more and more divisive. That we can come together, listen, share our points of views, and help create a pathway forward that really meets the needs of the community as a whole. And so we really appreciate these panelists taking time away from their families this evening to share their points of view. And as we were setting this up with them, it's you realize certain things, that every single person wants a clean, healthy environment. Every single person wants a vibrant local economy. And so we all have the same end goal. So I guess we can just go home, right? No, okay. but so we all have the same end goal, and so it's about striking that balance and getting there. So we'll kick things off. Our first question, I guess we can start with Judith. We'll start at this end. Please take 3 to 5 minutes to share your position on DAF storage and use.
Hi, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here on behalf of the Friends of the Nanticoke River. This is a really important conversation for our local community. The Friends of the Nanticoke have worked for over 30 years to conserve the Nanticoke River and its watershed. And during that time, we have always recognized how essential farming and forestry are to maintaining our rural economy and our rural landscape and our rural way of life. We also recognize that the poultry industry is fundamental directly and indirectly in supporting that rural economy. The poultry industry has done an amazing job, I think, in terms of managing its waste over the decades that I've lived here on the Eastern Shore. I remember when there were open pits of dead chickens right down the street from me, packs of wild dogs feeding on them. We've come a really long way, and they have done an incredible job with waste handling overall. It's just not enough now. The industry has grown. The production of waste has increased to a level that the current technology just isn't sustainable. We feel as though there's such a massive production of DAF waste that applying it to the farm fields is not really the way to go anymore. We know that the poultry industry employed these means of dealing with its waste in order to ease the burden on the landfills and also to make use of the leftover materials that were in the offal and get a value-added product along the way. But I think that what we need to recognize now is that we need a new direction. And I'm encouraged very much by the prospect of technologies such as anaerobic digestion and composting and biochar production. A suite of these, perhaps others that we're not even discussing tonight, that can take this material that is being produced and derive even added value from it by producing, taking that methane and generating energy from it, reducing the burden on our waterways, and reducing the nutrient load to the soils that is contained in a liquid slurry. The damage to our waterways from this process has been growing. The Transquaking River has suffered, and several other waterways have suffered from the disposal of liquid waste into from rendering plants. So we really are encouraged that I think it's time for our community as a whole to come together and be more supportive of these technologies that have not gotten off the ground here. How many anaerobic digestion plants are in Europe, and how many are here? I mean, it's sad that isn't more accepted. And the Friends of the Nanticoke River would really like to see some of these be the way of the future. And we think that this would be the way in which we can continue to have a thriving agricultural economy. Thanks very much.
Okay. So first off, the Farm Bureau, we view DAF, the land application, is a good alternative use for it. The other alternatives that are coming are even better. I would say the issue that has been our Farm Bureau throughout the years has worked to keep a great image in this county of ag, whether it's proper handling of chicken litter, chemical use, you name it. And that's really been the DAF process for a land application has I want to make sure it's understood, it's vastly improved in the last few years that they're injecting it in a no-till manner instead of spreading it on top and then working it in, because that's when you get the odor, the flies, and those issues. Because when people, our community that we live in, my neighbors are calling, they see tractors, tractor trailers, they see farming. And that's been the black eye and kind of the grit on your skin as the Farm Bureau and the community, that we're all out here doing everything we can to provide, to be good neighbors. And we've kind of drug along the applicators and denial. It's been a slow grinding process. We're not against the application, we just want proper application. As far as the storage, I would say that of the product, the Farm Bureau's view is at the plant and then direct to the field, because it's regulated at the plant. They're already, it's there. They handle it in that facility and then truck it to the field. There was a case for the tanks in that, out in the community, because it would speed up the process to the field. But now the applicators are using like it's a portable storage unit. So they'll put 3 or 4 units in a field. They can keep the tractor trailer, they can keep the tractor in the field going, applying. They can keep the trucks coming to those tanks, and that speeds up the process. That way they're not in the field for 3 weeks. They'll go do 100 acres and maybe a few days, and then they're gone. So that's kind of less, I've looked at that as, or we have looked at that as, if we can do that, we don't need tanks spread out throughout the community. So that's kind of where I am.
From the position of the Neighborhood Action Group, first of all, I want to thank WET for putting this together, because 5 years ago when we first got into this fight against storage, we recommended that there be a roundtable established where all the stakeholders could get together and talk this out. And 5 years later, here we are. It's not a roundtable, but I see all the actors here that should be here. What I heard tonight, I am very optimistic, and I feel like it's a win-win-win for the environment, a win for agriculture, and also a win for the residents. Now, there has to be a separation. There's a relationship in DAF application and storage. Certainly they're related because they both involve DAF, but it's two very different processes. And as Charles said, I think too, living out in the rural areas, that I see a big difference in the past couple years on how DAF is being applied. And I think it's being applied more appropriately and according to MDA regs. I feel like, and you can go back and look at our blog, it's neighborhoodaction.group, and I'm not going to give you the whole 5-year recap here because there's a lot to it. But I feel like the tank on Porter Mill Road was kind of like a ground zero, because prior to that time, there were skirmishes. There were people on Dagsboro Road. There were people in Chapel Branch in Hebron. There were people on Porter Mill Road in Hebron, Log Cabin Road, Leavenworth Shield Road. Those people have been contacting the town of Hebron and the county and MDA for help in the application, problems associated with application. And we have over 30 personal testimonies that we went door to door, knocking on strangers' doors, getting these testimonies. And there were some very real problems there. And they were not being addressed, except for somebody going by and spraying their backyard with an insecticide every now and then. It didn't take care of the problem. But I see, as we have, I don't want to say rattle chains, but that's what we did when we started the tank issue. It rattled chains so that I believe that MDA probably looked at the situation and said, we really need to do something different here. And I see a difference in that. That's good. I think so far as the storage goes, first of all, the application, we've been told, and we all know by now, that isn't an MDA-approved soil amendment, which is put on the land by the nutrient management plan rates that are required by that. So that's one thing. But with the storage, and I get this from the MDA, told me specifically when I first called them, we don't have anything to do with storage. We don't want anything to do with storage. You go to your county. So we did. And we worked with our county council for 3 years. And we were finally able to pass some legislation in Wicomico County, which effectively restricted open top storage and has left room also for the anaerobic digestion to proceed in the county, which we were very careful to do that. We established a good working relationship, I felt like, with our county council. They listened to us, and you see what happened in October of 22. So here we are. One of the biggest problems I see with this now is a lack of transparency. When we try to get information from MDA, we are totally ignored. When we try to get information from the county, we were totally ignored. And I'm talking PIA, which is by law is a Public Information Act request. We got nothing. MDE came through with some some adequate response, but it's just frustrating when you get totally ignored with something that they're supposed to respond to and they don't. There is no transparency. You go to Delaware's DENREC website and you put in DAF and you're going to find all kinds of things. When I go to MDE and put in DAF or MDA and put in DAF, it's very hard to find the things that you're looking for. So I think the state needs to work on their transparency. They also need to get behind these new, and they're here because look what they've done in Delaware. These new technologies of anaerobic digestion, and I've heard of some of the newer things today, the composting, the biochar, the thermochemical processing. That's very optimistic. And so I'm leaving here learning something tonight, and I'm more optimistic about that we can work together and we can improve the situation for the people who live near the application and the storage so that it's not such a nuisance. And that's it.
Good evening. So before I came here, my thought was, what is the purpose of this forum about? Why are we here? What is this discussion? And this discussion about DAF. But after hearing the scientists and a lot of people on the panel, it seems like this is just a rah-rah for biodigesters. And so DAF tanks are super, everyone agrees they're disgusting. No one wants to be near them. They're the smell and all that comes with them. So what do? The answer is biodigesters, anaerobic digesters, but they themselves come with problems as well. Problems that could lead to explosions from the methane gas. The CO2 that's released still is a problem for the atmosphere and climate change. The overall, all of these matters really just lead to the problem that has to do in this area primarily with the poultry industry and its oversaturation of poultry in a confined smaller areas. And so the problem that's happening with that industry has now become the problem of the taxpayer. And what does a taxpayer going to do to help the poultry industry with this over excess of manure and waste that is in our area? And we know that our land here is oversaturated with nitrates. We know that your average farmer, and I've spoken to many of them, who said, of course, and as was said here earlier, they don't have anywhere else to put this manure. You can't lay it on the land anymore. So this is nothing. It can't go there because there's already too much there. In addition, what kind of studies have there been to talk about the long-term effects of this stuff being placed on our land? We don't know that either. There are a lot of questions that we still have to know. CO2 is still poisonous. As well. The subsidies that are given in this area to assist that lead to, the discussion was brought up about the money that's made, the finances that are happening. Well, that's due to subsidies as well, that the subsidies that comes from the taxpayer. So what I'm saying is, I know that every scientist is not for, biodigesters. All scientists are not for DAF. I wish there would have been a scientist here that spoke about that. But I want to say that we have for a long time done all that we can and work on all sides to support the community and to prevent projects. That $2 million granted project that was looking to come over on the west side. Every time you turn around, 13 CAFOs wanted to come on the west side. Everything wants to come on the west side. And a lot of these things sometimes are targeting certain communities. And so there's a lot more investigating that needs to happen, as opposed to this just being, oh my gosh, the greatest thing ever coming is this opportunity for anaerobic digestion. Not so. So we continue to take a stance against it, and so do many people in the community. It was Delaware fought for 3 years against DevCo coming over there. 3 years where 89% of the people were speaking in opposition of this project from coming. Now, some could say, well, now that there's certain information that says it's better for the community or what have you, but maybe they just got worn down. And so there's a lot more information that needs to be discussed and a lot more ways that we can look at this. And I think everyone deserves to make a good living. Everyone deserves to be able to contribute to the community. It was somebody mentioned about what's happening in Europe. Well, Europe covers over their fans that come out of their large chicken houses to prevent that ammonia from coming into the community. We don't do that here. So we want to adopt certain portions of what Europe's doing, but we don't want to get all of it. So I think we just have to be honest about the whole picture. In a lot of ways, this is just another way for the poultry industry just to not be accountable for what the things that they're doing that are not necessarily contributing positively to our farmers or our community.
So thank you, Lisa. I appreciate what you said, that, again, I think everyone here expects and wants a good environment. Everyone here expects and wants a good economy. Just by raise of hands, how many here ate today? Yeah. So we also want food as well too, right? That's an important component of our livelihood. And I have to appreciate what Ms. Kinney said, in the sense that I would agree. I really wish we would have had this roundtable 5 years ago. And I say that because, again, a lot of this technology or the information that was shared has been around, in place, not quite yet, but has been around for a while. And so we within the chicken community very much appreciate technology. We've been doing it for years. Our chicken industry has been on Delmarva for 100 years. We celebrated that last year. Again, we've made a lot of changes, a lot of advancements. We follow the science. We've done all that we can to continue to improve, to be good neighbors. And I just want to, again, point out a couple things that when we talk about DAF and DAF residuals, we're talking about a byproduct that is actually from a solution, a water quality solution, and that is better wastewater management. We are doing a better job of making sure we have less nutrients that are directly going into our waterways. It's part of food processing. It's part of any processing that we have a wastewater process side of it. So dissolved air flotation residuals are actually a byproduct from a good story of how we have reduced the amount of nutrients that are going into our waterways. When we talk about storage, that's also talking about the good story. Why do we need storage? Because between December 15th and March 1st, we can't apply nutrients on the ground. And that's part of our nutrient management laws. And that is to make sure, again, that we don't have excess nutrients running off into waterways. So because of that, we are where we are here now, where we have DAF residual, which again has been mentioned as a soil amendment. It is certified by the state chemist. It is regulated within nutrient management plans. It is regulated, it is reported out in those annual implementation reports. And it is used as a soil amendment, as an organic type of fertilizer, very similar to litter as well too. So again, good things that we're doing and making sure that we can continue to recycle and continue to be good neighbors here within the Delmarva community as well. So again, we we've talked quite a bit about short-term and long-term. So this is a conversation that we did have a meeting, Charles. I think you probably remember we had a meeting 4 or 5 years ago discussing this. And again, I wish that it had been on a broader community level, quite honestly. And I will say that I regret that it wasn't, because we had that discussion about short-term and long-term. Short-term, dissolved air flotation residuals, land application is going to be the best method because we don't want to landfill. We want to recycle. These are nutrients. We want to use them. We want to make sure that we're using the best technology. We appreciate it, and we worked with the Maryland Department of Agriculture when they were redoing their nutrient management regulations and in requiring injection, and we agreed with that as well too. Because again, what we're talking about here is not necessarily a water quality issue, it's an odor issue, and we recognize that as well too. So making sure that we're properly injecting into the ground for application is absolutely important. Long term, some of the technologies that have been mentioned, we are excited about as well too, as a chicken community. Because again, we do think that there are some great opportunities to help reduce the odor, to make possibly an even better nutrient to go onto the fields. That's going to help our farmers that are raising the corn and soybeans that are going to feed our chickens. And it's a continual cycle that we will have. So again, we feel that we've come a long way. We feel like there's still a long way to go, and we appreciate the opportunities. We're looking forward to technologies and seeing them up and running in action. And then hopefully, again, we'll move into the long term when it comes to dissolved air flotation.
Thank you, everyone. Was there anything from the technology panel that piqued your interest or that you had concerns about?
I already said that they're all a hybrid. They all are supportive of the same technology, but they're just reciting it in different ways. So that's a concern to me, because it would have been nice to see a diversity of voice in that space because it's out there.
I would like to say right now we have a tank sitting down from us that is just spewing methane up into the air. And so what are you going to do about it? You're going to let it continue? I think the digesters are worth looking at, and it's happening over in Jessup. I think that's what you said. It was up and going quickly in Maryland, so evidently Maryland had some favorable sanctions on that. So I don't understand why. I guess maybe it's because of the difference between food scraps and DAF, maybe. Place where the place is. And that's one of the things that I have suggested some years ago to our own council and county, is that they try to identify good spots on state roads that would accommodate something like this, that is not such a burden on the residents that live near it. And what I heard was that the place in Jessup was on 5 acres in the middle of a very populous area and was able to operate without any undue negative effects there. So there's certainly places around here that are large enough to accommodate something like that. So I think it's worth looking into, and I think we need to, and it'd be better than what we have now. Is it perfect? Probably not. Somewhere down the road, we'll find something that we might have to tweak, but it is definitely better than what we have now.
I just wanted to speak to Monica's point about anaerobic digestion having problems and that there would be other perspectives that weren't heard. I think that may be true, but one thing that I want to emphasize, and I don't think this can be explained enough because it's a complicated story, but the process of anaerobic digestion takes carbon that is captured by the plants and converted to, or that carbon then is taken up by chickens or fish or whoever. And then when it goes through anaerobic digestion, that carbon is released some way, right? It can be released to the atmosphere by decomposition if you put it in a landfill. It can be released as methane if you put it through anaerobic digestion. And if that is done and that methane is burned to CO2, 100% of the methane then, or not maybe 100%, but the vast majority of that methane is converted to CO2, which is a less harmful greenhouse gas and doesn't represent any increase in CO2 that wouldn't happen naturally when those plants decomposed or those animals decomposed. So when Dr. Lansing showed the slide with those little green bars going down, that's really saying, hey, we're actually making the greenhouse gas situation better with anaerobic digestion. Now, there may be other objections to it, like the possibility of explosion. I think that's a very rare occurrence, but I understand the worries about any industry coming into a neighborhood. I think that's something that has to be taken very seriously. But it is important to remember that in terms of greenhouse gases, anaerobic digestion is a win, and I don't think you're going to find a scientist who would claim otherwise because of the way that it takes that carbon and makes it into something less harmful for the environment.
I understand the entire process. What I'm telling you, what I'm saying in general, is that the reason why we're here and having this discussion is because there is an overabundance of what is produced in this industry, that the industry has created a problem that we are having to solve. I'm not saying that methane is far worse than CO2, for sure, absolutely. But CO2 is still not great either. But the problem is, it's not about, yes, all of what you said, true. It's true, and how it's processed and all of that. It does mitigate that. However, we're not addressing the fact of how did we get here? And that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we have an overabundance. It's keep going up and up. This was not a model created by your average farmer. This was not what they normally did back in the day. All of this thing is now we're here with all of this stuff, and we have to find something to do with it. I get that. And I also understand listen, when I first heard about what was going on with Lynette's community, horrified. Should have never happened. DAF is absolutely horrible and disgusting. And yes, this is some sort of alternative. But I'm still saying, my point is that it's just because it's an alternative, it still doesn't make it great, is the point. I understand I've studied this a long time. I'm not a scientist, but I've been in environmental work for a long time, particularly with agriculture. So what I'm saying is, it's okay to have differences of opinion, and it's okay to have other ideas. It's okay. We don't all have to agree the same way, but I'm not alone in this.
Monica, I think if we could follow up with you, because you have some strong opinions on this one. I was wondering, could you articulate, what would be a good solution in your mind to the issues that we're facing as far as excess poultry waste and application? What would that look like?
Okay, listen. One of my good friends who's here that I hadn't seen in a long time, who's a farmer, was saying, wow, wouldn't it have been wonderful if we could have, amongst ourselves, had our own advocacy groups and work out certain things for ourselves? And I said, I would love that. I think that would be fantastic. This is not an answer that is easily answerable at this moment, but for years, we have been saying that this model of mega poultry is not sustainable. The majority of, and what we saw that happened during COVID was a great example of that. We're surrounded by 1 million poultry companies, and still nobody could get poultry. How'd that happen? Because everything that we're producing here is not necessarily being utilized in this space. We have eliminated the majority of the independent processing plants that farmers, if they wanted to independently process, cannot do that. They have to go miles and miles and hours away just to independently process. So the model that's set up, where you have to go big or go home, where the farmer is left with all the debt all the debt, all the responsibility, but they don't have a say in what chickens they get. They don't have a say in what they feed them. They don't have a say in the model. They don't have a say in any of it. So the idea of diversity has gone from this industry where there were more independent farmers alongside of integrator growers. Independent farmers don't even necessarily have access to capital easily anymore either. So this is not an easy answer to have. The industry is just not doing a sustainable model. It is not a sustainable model. And I can't answer all of that at this moment because I don't want to monopolize the time. But we are in a crisis where we talked about this decades ago, but nobody wanted to listen. So now we're here. So now we're scrambling, and now we're forcing everybody to just hurry, pick something, because we're desperate now. But people have been saying this for a long time, that we were going to get here to this place where it's not a sustainable model. You know, and that's it. Go ahead, Charles.
You show me where the excess litter is? I'm just asking. That you said excess litter. You can't, just as I'm a farmer, I grow chickens. If I wanted to get rid of all my litter, it's gone. Okay. And that litter has to go to farms that can take it. Okay. We're under a nutrient management plan. Every farmer in here, if you're in Delaware, you're under a nutrient management plan. So if there was an excess, there would be a pile somewhere, or I wouldn't be able to get litter. I wouldn't be able to clean out our houses. So that's not an issue. To get back to your comment on you couldn't get chicken during COVID. That's because we are set up in a plan. A plant can't turn on a dime. I mean, Holla can give you a whole rundown of how it all works, but they can't. They're set up to do cut up chicken, whole chicken, chicken nuggets. They can't change that in the supply chain. Now, during that time, I could get all the chicken you wanted. I was selling it by the case right at our market. So more chicken and beef than we ever have since we've been there. But it's just a supply chain issue, not the model that you're speaking of. You can't change a plant overnight to go from sending most of their products to consumers eating out to consumers eating at home. People couldn't go anywhere, so it's a different model. I don't get a debate about it. Your question was about excess litter, and that's not an issue. It's just if there was excess litter, they might be getting exported to the mushroom companies in Pennsylvania, but it's having to go to different farms. We're moving it up the shore from the lower shore. And just to make, so everybody in this room understands, when you say it's saturated, if you grow a corn crop, take any of my fields, and you go plant corn out there, we're not applying phosphorus unless it's allowed with the litter. We don't apply any other phosphorus. But all this, when you say saturated, it makes it sound like you should be able to grow everything you can, but we don't have to put anything on there. And that's not the case. That's not agronomy. We have to add nutrients, DAF being one of them, litter being another one, and commercial fertilizer being the third. So, comment on it.
We have a bunch of questions from the audience and from the residents. Holly, did you want to answer?
What I was just going to say is out on the table are some information that DCA provided. We've been collecting numbers and data for since really the 1950s on our chicken community. What you may be surprised to know is we actually process less birds than we did in the 1990s. We have less growers and we have less chicken houses. Just wanted to encourage folks to take a look at that, as well as check out our website on information as to our chicken community.
Okay, great. Sorry, we're just trying to figure out. So I think what they're going to do is bring the scientist panel up. Is composting offal before it is sent to be processed into DAF a viable option? So then, rather than creating the separate.
First me. Okay. Yes. So again, the wastewater comes up. The DAF brings all of the carbohydrates, all the nutrients, all the things up. So that's the DAF process is bringing all that out. What's left behind is pretty clean, much cleaner water that then we clean and discharge, right? And so at the processing plant, they're beholden to that water discharge permit. So the DAF that we bring up, that's all the rest of the stuff that's not discharged, and it can be composted, digested, or directly field applied. So yeah, you can do that. I hope I answered your question.
So, and I would,
Yeah, go ahead.
I said I
Molly.
would add to that that parts of some of that offal is also used in another step, which is rendering, which again, I think you mentioned pet food, things of that. So within the chicken industry, every little piece of that chicken from top to bottom is used in some form or fashion. There is really, from the bird itself, there's very, very little, if no waste, because again, a lot of those, the bones, feathers, those pieces are actually then taken on to another process known as rendering. That again is what also helps us in providing other byproducts, including things, protein, things for pet food as well too. So there's various different processes within that waste management piece that is part of these steps within the different companies as well.
We're starting to see PFAS pretty ubiquitous in the environment and in different foods. Does anaerobic digestion, do you know if that addresses if there were to be PFAS in any of the material?
Okay, so I think the question is about PFAS. So you hear the term PFAS, and PFAS is persistent organic materials. And so these are basically compounds that are in the environment that don't break down very easily, and so we see a lot of this with drinking water concerns, with what's going through a wastewater treatment plant. So we're worried about these persistent organic materials that are in the environment. So to answer the question in terms of PFAS and DAF, to bring it back to DAF, so we're much more worried about PFAS. We need to make sure that it doesn't come in our drinking water and wastewater, because you often have storm water coming in. You have things going down your drains. You don't know what people are throwing in their toilets, chemicals and whatnot. We worry about it a lot with the wastewater treatment process. When we're talking about an individual entity, so we're producing food, that food is going to be tested for PFAS. And then that, again, what's coming out of that process, as we said, that goes into pet food and it goes into other things, and that's going to be tested. And it's also, again, deemed safe to by the soil chemist to be a soil amendment. And so we're less worried about PFAS when we're talking about one entity. We're more worried about these organics being out in the environment that have been there circulating for years and years, because they don't break down very well. And the EPA is doing a lot of work to try to really understand PFAS more and how we can eliminate it. So the digestion or the composting or some of these products aren't necessarily, they're really hard, they're persistent. That's the whole point. So they've been around for 20 years just circulating or more. And so some of the digestion process can, get some of those compounds, some of the composting can, but usually that's not what they're geared towards. They're usually geared towards breaking down the easily degradable material.
In the talk of anaerobic digestion, there was in the slides some byproducts that came out of that, as well as the water that was coming out of it. The question is, what were some of the byproducts that came out of that, and how are those handled, as well as what happens to the water that comes out of anaerobic digestion? And then a third question that was also online is the fertilizer that's coming out of that. Would that be available for home consumption in your home personal gardens?
Yeah, so from the DC wastewater digester, for example, they actually produce bloom that actually goes into Home Depot and goes into stores, and you can actually buy that. And that's even from a wastewater digester. So yes, it is something that you can do. So what comes into the digester, it all comes out, but then we can do solid separation to create a liquid product and create a solid product that then is like a compost soil amendment that you can, they dry it up a little bit before they put it in the stores. But yeah, there's all different types of products, and I know in Devco they do a lot of different types of projects that come out, or you can just have the whole digestate that goes directly on the fields. That's what they do in some of the farms as well. So it really depends on the process you want to use.
So I can comment on the water. I mean, when you design a system, you're really designing it based on the region in which it's going to be built. So for example, our facility in Howard County, there's not a real demand for the water. Water is very plentiful. So we treat the water and we send it directly down, hard pipe it to the county for their wastewater treatment plant. However, if we're designing a facility in a particularly arid region like Arizona or someplace where water is a scarce commodity, we would treat it for beneficial reuse and use it for agriculture. I recently gave a tour to two gentlemen from Nigeria who said they have a lot of waste, not reliable energy, and they need clean water. And you can design a system to produce potable water if that's your end goal. So the recyclability of the water is endless. It just depends on what you're going to use it for and how bad you need it.
How much CO2 annually is produced for anaerobic digestion versus composting?
I think this has already been answered several times, but it's biogenic CO2. So photosynthesis brings CO2 into a plant. We eat those plants, and when I eat the plant, I respire CO2. I have feces that comes out of me. There is carbon in that, and so part of that in that process, there is carbon. If that degrades in a landfill or in a wastewater treatment plant, that releases that CO2 back into the environment as part of a cycle. Because you do produce renewable energy, we're actually offsetting fossil fuel energy through that process. So we're actually sequestering CO2 even more than the biogenic CO2 that goes into the atmosphere.
And just to add to that, I mean, the big difference is whether we're producing CO2 or methane when we're talking about greenhouse gas influences on the atmosphere, because the methane is just 20 times more powerful than carbon dioxide per molecule. And so ultimately the whole CO2 budget's a net zero. It's just life going around a big circle. And right now we're only adding to it on Earth because we're using fossil fuel. It was captured by plants eons ago, and now we're burning off in a heartbeat. So ultimately that CO2 is just in a cycle. And so everything that Stephanie said is true.
In the graph that we showed at the beginning, if that methane that's being produced naturally, we produce methane in our own stomachs. And so flatulence actually has methane in it. We produce some, but the cows produce more, and other, that manure, when it has that anaerobic degradation, that produces. So if we're not covering it, capturing it, and utilizing it, then that methane is going into the atmosphere as well. So actually, it not only, just by covering a lagoon, we're actually reducing the amount of methane that's going into the atmosphere. So we're reducing greenhouse gases that way, and then we're offsetting them as well by producing renewable energy.
In Maryland, what, if any, are the restrictions on injection of DAF with regard to distance to waterways?
So again, these are going to be based off of the nutrient management regulations. So I don't know those off the top of my head. I'm looking at a fellow farmer, but basically, again, it's going to be based off of the nutrient management regulations as any nutrients, and making sure that, again, we are protecting our waterways, putting the nutrients into the ground so that the crops can take up the nutrients and not go any other place.
I mean, all I would say is everything for a nutrient application is in your nutrient management plan. So it's taken in the slope of the field, whether you have a ditch in the field, whether you have a blue line stream that's at the borders of the field, how much woodlands is between that, all those things the nutrient management planner factors in. And then then that's given to the farmer, and that's how you apply the nutrients. It doesn't matter if it's commercial fertilizer, DAF, poultry litter, it doesn't matter. It's all calculated in.
Can someone discuss the civil rights Title VI complaint in Delaware and the 2 linguistically isolated communities closest to the site?
So there was a complaint made to the EPA against DENREC of alleging that DENREC had not done due diligence in reaching out to the impacted communities in determining the appropriateness of permits. I will say, and I think it was already mentioned here, it was close to 3 years of review. And I do know that DENREC produced documents in, I believe, at least 2 different languages to the surrounding communities. That complaint went to the EPA. The EPA is still under investigation with DENREC. They haven't released any results. They haven't found any. They haven't found any substance to it, but they haven't found, in favor of DENREC at this point. Oh, I'm sorry. DENREC is the Department of the Environment in Delaware.
What are the current impediments to deploying digester technology on the Eastern Shore?
So deploying, well, I got to be honest with you. When we launched our project in Jessup, Maryland, it was hailed as an environmental win. I mean, everybody was saying how great this was, that we were diverting the organic waste from the waste stream. It would not be going to landfills or incinerators. So I was somewhat naively taken back when the same environmental groups that supported us in our Maryland facility came out against us in Delaware. So I was drawn to the conclusion that I'm not so sure it's a concern about the technology. It's more about the material that we're actually using. And I think the complaints have centered around, this evening, have centered around the poultry industry and some people's objection to the poultry industry being on the Eastern Shore. But the technology doesn't change. It's a very simple process. Anything that's organic that breaks down can be run through a digester, and it's kind of like your microwave. What you put in is what you get out.
Yeah. I'm the only person that says something about poultry industry. I have no problem with the poultry industry being on the Eastern Shore. Let's just get that clear. I don't have a problem with poultry. I don't have a problem with poultry farmers. I have a problem with anybody who's not being accountable for things that they do negatively that adversely affect people in the community. That's it. So please do not say something like that, because I said nothing against poultry. I have my own chickens. These are things that people can do. Do your own independent thing, but I am not against the poultry industry. And that's one of the things that people love to throw out anytime that you want to make a comment about something about being accountable, then they're saying you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater, and that is not the case. Please do not say things like that.
So just for clarification, I was referring to the environmental advocacy groups that I've come in contact.
Well, then say
not,
that, because in this
I
forum,
apologize.
I'm the only person that said something. So then it appears like you're targeting me.
I apologize.
What is the plan for the location of future digesters? Would they go in industrial zones or industrial areas?
A digester is not a cheap project to build. So before you move into an area, the first thing you have to determine, is there an organic feedstock that would warrant building a facility? The reason that we built our facility at the Maryland Food Authority was because it's in the center of a very large area of organic waste. So before you move into a region, the first thing you would do is an organic waste study to determine where is the most viable place. Fortunately, in Maryland, the Maryland Department of the Environment is currently running a study that was funded or enacted by legislation requiring them to do an organics waste study, that they should be producing the results here by the end of next year.
And
I was
also
just
keep
gonna
in
add
mind.
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to add that, so if you're building a digester on farm as part of your manure management plan, then that actually goes through your manure management. If you already have animals on farm and you add a digester to that, then it goes through manure management plans. If you are a facility like the Jessup facility, that it's food waste and they're building it, then it actually goes through a different permitting process. So if we were to build it on a poultry processing plant, for example, that would be a different process than if it's built as part of your manure management plan. So there are a little bit of differences in terms of how you cite it based on what is already the practice of that area in which it's located.
Thank you. You said what I was going to say about the farm, but the other piece is it's how it's zoned also. The zoning, according to the county that you live in, and how they designate it. And then out of that designation, determine if we're going to allow certain things, I-1, I-2, all of these things, if we're going to put it industrial, if we're going to put it agricultural. And that's something that you as citizens have influence over through your council.
Can you talk to a little bit about how DAF is monitored and regulated before it's applied to fields?
Sure. So again, I think there may be some confusion. In order for any soil amendment to be registered with the state of Maryland, it must be tested, and that testing must be sent in or be part of the state chemists. They're the ones, that's where the regulations are right now for any soil amendment, any soil conditioner. So DAF is tested and registered as a soil amendment. There are reporting that goes with it. It's called tonnage reporting. So again, under MDA's law for the state chemists, there is tonnage reporting requirements. There are tonnage fee requirements that are all part of any soil amendment, including dissolved air flotation residuals, including the Scott's material that you buy at Home Depot. Any type of soil conditioners are going through that process. Again, that's under the Maryland Department of Agriculture. From there, if it's land applied, then again, that's going to be part of a nutrient management plan, which you've heard several times here. Farmers must follow that prescription of exactly, what nutrients are going to go in the field based off of the crops that are taking up the nutrients. And then every year, a farmer has to complete an annual implementation report to say what nutrients they used on the field. So you got your plan and you got your report that says what you did. So all of those, again, fall under the Maryland Department of Agriculture. And again, no matter if you're using litter, commercial fertilizer, or any other soil conditioner, those are the rules that it falls under. So at minimum, it's tested once a year in order to be registered. You will find that a number of farmers that do use soil conditioner and DAF residual will test it again, because again, no farmer wants to put additional nutrients onto their fields, and they certainly don't want to have to pay for additional nutrients to put onto the field either. So farmers may test it more often, but it's required to be tested once a year as part of the registry.
That's one of the questions that we had as a people group that we were not sure, did not get any answers to, was that when it is tested once a year, then you're assuming that that processing plant is going to put out an exact same nutrient quality throughout the entire year. But what if, assuming that's correct, then you can use that for amount for your nutrient management plan. But what about all the different sources that go into a tank? And is that tank tested in Maryland once a year as well? And if it's tested once a year, that mixture, so to speak, of different sources changes throughout the year. So how can you accurately say what the nutrient management or the nutrient content of that tank would be, of the DAF in that tank, to adequately use it on your farm? That's one of the questions that we have been asking that hasn't been answered.
In what ways would you like to see increased communication or transparency?
To me, the biggest problem here with the differences of opinion revolves around whether the poultry industry is doing enough to address issues around waste, excess production of processing waste, if there is that, and whether the poultry industry has a role to play in this community for the long term. Is it something that we see as vital to our economy and our way of life because of what it does for farming, because of the opportunities it provides for farmers that would be disappearing if the poultry industry went away. I just like to have more of an open dialogue about that because I feel like, that's kind of the elephant in the room. Do you want poultry, not poultry to go away, but do you want the chicken industry to go away, or do you want it to be better? And can it be better, and can these technologies make it better?
I guess I probably have more questions than response. So just trying to understand poultry versus poultry industry. I just want to clarify. So you've heard me probably say numerous times today, chicken community, because again, that's what we are. We often talk about the three-legged stool of our chicken community. It's the chicken companies, so often known as integrators. It's the contract family farmers, the growers of the chicken, and it's our grain industry. That is the three-legged stool that really makes up our economy. It makes up our agricultural viability and really is a big part of our heritage that we have here on Delmarva. So I don't know that in using that three-legged stool analogy, if any one of those legs was to fall, then the whole economy falls, the whole stool falls. So, again, I think that we've talked about a little bit the discussion about excess waste, and that's the part where I'm a little bit confused as well too, because again, I think what we may see as excess is actually, again, the improvements to wastewater management that we've had over the years. That means that there are less, especially within the processing plants, especially within our farms, our fields. Those improvements have actually meant that, again, we have less nutrients that are going either directly point source into our waterways or indirectly non-point source into our waterways through, again, whether it's manure storage, composting on farms, whether it's, again, the precision agriculture and the practices that we have on farm for our grain farmers in particular. So I think maybe, again, some of these things have created byproducts, which is what we're talking about with DAF residual, but that byproduct is, again, because we're doing so much better in wastewater treatment and wastewater management that, again, we have this nutrient, but it's actually less nutrients, less things that are going into our waterways. And I think that is often forgotten when we talk about the improvements. And I think we're going to continue. We have to continue. The term sustainable has been mentioned several times here. And I would argue that we're an extremely sustainable chicken community that has been here for 100 years. We've changed, we've adapted, we are economically sustainable. We have come a long way in being environmentally sustainable. And I think, when it comes to feeding all of us, because again, I ate 2 meals today, one was chicken, it's an important part of being sustainable to feed all of us as well too.
I was just going to add to this. I mean, one of the things, so my students and I, we do a lot of work with bioenergy and waste energy. We actually do landfill sampling. My students go to trash, they sort through trash, and we determine, what's the bioenergy potential of what's going into the landfill, right? But I will say my students, when we sample DAF, it smells. It smells in the lab. It smells when we sample it. It does smell. When we go to digesters, when we go to composting sites, it doesn't smell, right? There is no smell associated. My students are really happy. There is no smell associated with these technologies, but the question is, why aren't these everywhere? Well, it costs money, right? So it doesn't cost any money to put it in the landfill. Well, we have a landfill tipping fee, but that's where a lot of the smell is and where a lot of the waste goes. But it costs money to do digesters and do composting. And my students would much rather go out and sample any composting sites or any digester sites rather than go and sample the landfills. But the fact is that's where a lot of our waste goes if we don't provide the resources whether it's an individual farmer, whether it's a company, whether it's government subsidies, whatever it might be, to actually implement something that's going to take away those odors. And so these technologies are out there, but they're not free. Someone has to build it.
Just really quickly in response to transparency, back in, I guess, 2012, when I started in this environmental work, or 2000, I don't even remember at this point, but it was very difficult to get information, hard. And when you're talking about a FOIA request, which you have to respond, they're legally bound to respond within 30 days, and you still don't get anything 30 days, 32 days, 30, and there's no accountability in that space. We're still experiencing some of those issues today. Depending on the power that a particular group has, it's harder to get information. I had a personal conversation back in 2014 with Governor Hogan, and I asked him, that we need information. We need to be able to find out what's going on. We need some answers, all of these things. And he said to me, and it is videotaped, so, and I know I'm being videotaped. He said, you don't want to mess with the poultry industry because it is a backbone of your economy. My response to that, I said to him, well, then you're going to have a whole sea of chickens as your constituents and no people. I don't believe any industry should not be looked at just because of the number of jobs that it brings. Once upon a time, we had DuPont here, we had Campbell Soup, and then matter of fact, we know what DuPont did back in the day. My point is that everybody has a responsibility to invest in our community and to also be good actors in the community. And it should not have anything to do with how much money we bring or how much we do. I think diversity is very good in industry. I think it's very good for our economy to have a diversity of industry, and it doesn't take away from a particular industry that's already strong and robust, right? Everyone is not going to work in poultry. Everyone's not going to work in Tidal Health. Everyone's not going to work at Walmart. Those are our top people here, as well as Salisbury University. So diversity is good and accountability is good. And we don't know what that accountability is unless we do have transparency.
The transparency issue, we're still trying to determine just exactly how many gallons are produced at the processing plants and also at the rendering plant. And I know that there is a nutrient management requirement that you report your tonnage, but does that equal the amount of DAF that actually left the plants? Is there a system? Is there a paper trail that tracks that? Also with locally and with our experience last year with the spill, we received, health department said that they had no records whatsoever pertaining to the spill. The county, we did not hear anything from them. MDA, we heard nothing from them. These were all requested with PIA request. Why are they not fulfilling their legal obligation to give us the information when we know that there's some there? And that's not the only instance. There are meetings that we are aware of, that we were participants of, that we asked for minutes of, and they said that they're not there. So there's a lot of hiding things, I think, going on, and I don't know why. But that is a big problem that I've seen from our end of things so far as a citizen group goes, that we just can't get proper information that they're legally required to give us. I think that's mainly what our biggest frustration is. And so far as the spill goes, we still don't know anything. Should we know something? I think we are due some answers, but I guess we'll just keep on living our life over there on Porter Mill Road and do the best we can.
As a company, as we launch our project, continue to move forward on our project in Delaware, we realize that our success largely depends on effective communication and partnership with the stakeholders. And one of the things that we're actively working on right now is developing a community engagement plan where we can have sound practices for making sure that we have outreach to the community, that we're able to get input from them, ideas, concerns, suggestions, and be able to effectively communicate through that as a medium, if you will.
There was a comment in the first panel where anaerobic digestion needed carbon to help with the process. Would that be a potential avenue for habitat restoration, pollinator habitat, or things like that? Or additional? Could you elaborate a little bit more on what the additional economic benefits would be for local farmers?
That's a great question. Thank you for proposing that. And that actually goes to the crux of a lot of what NRCS is trying to do now. They're trying to explore avenues for the whole program now is a huge program that's being run across the country. It's, I don't know, Stephanie, what was it, $250 billion, some crazy amount of money. But it's basically, it's called climate smart agriculture, essentially. And they're trying to commodify different crops and make them climate friendly so that just like the organic brand in the store, you would have a climate smart brand in the store. And the thinking is that people might pay a premium, whether that in our economy here in the Eastern Shore, we might have a climate smart chicken tender, right? And have a little stamp on that. And the processes of producing that would be known to sequester carbon and reduce methane and nitrous oxide emissions from farm soils, for example, and therefore fight climate change. And so that's kind of where they're going. And so our project specifically, and many other across the country, are trying to enlist small farmers who may be outside, and a little bit outside my realm here, I'm a plant physiologist, so who might be, and Stephanie can probably help me on the other side of this too, but who might be in a place where they are not getting the maximum economic benefit from their fields, let's say. And so by developing a new carbon source for anaerobic digestion systems, which would be, say, switchgrass, or it could be miscanthus in this area, but they could then be brought into a situation where they would be dealing with the anaerobic digester companies, and that would be, for us, our project would be Chesapeake Utilities, and Chesapeake would be paying them, and we'd step at an entire new economy where small farmers would be able to produce switchgrass, which is a low input, sustainable, perennial plant that will produce carbon that can go into the anaerobic digesters and increase the efficiency of our anaerobic system. So yes, it's an opportunity for farmers to get involved for sure, especially on the small level, because we don't need huge amounts of material. And but the key, I think, that Stephanie brought up or was discussed, that the siting of these plants, it's critical that you're near your feedstocks, because we also work, my other projects are working on poplar and turning that to sustainable aviation fuel, which sounds even crazier, right? You know, throw a tree trunk into your jet fuel, into your engine and fly, but we can do that. We actually can produce aviation fuel from poplar trunks. But your economics falls apart when you get far from your processing plant. And so you have to be producing your feedstocks, whether it's the DAF or it's the switchgrass or it's the chicken litter, has to be really close to where you site your digesters, because once you start going far away, you're producing more carbon because you're trucking, and that then eats up your climate benefits because you're using a lot of fuel to move your feedstocks around. So I hope that answered that question.
What % of the total chicken production on the Eastern Shore is exported? Why do we need to take care of it? Take care of the waste this creates?
So we export very, very little. So part of the reason why the Delmarva chicken community has been here for years and continues to be here for years, because most people are probably more familiar with chicken in states like Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, many of our southern states. They technically are large chicken states. The reason why we're here in Delmarva and continue to be here is that within a 2 to 4 hour drive, how many millions of people live in cities like Baltimore, Philadelphia, DC, New York, Boston. And so that means that most of our marketplace is actually what we call tray pack or fresh chicken that stays right here, whether it's on Delmarva or stays within this East Coast area of the 2 to 4 to maybe 6 hour drive. So it is very little of our production here in Delmarva that is exported. It's actually probably around less than 10%, give or take.
But thank you all for contributing your time, and we really appreciate everyone coming up here and sharing their experience with DAF and our issues in the local area. So we really appreciate that.
Thanks everyone for coming, and we hope that you got out of this what we hoped you would, and I certainly did. And bringing such a diverse perspectives together, I think, always helps with hot issues like this. So thanks again.